Coming up next on This Week in Computer Hardware, we've got cheap 3TB drives and Skyrim tweaks for your NVIDIA GPU. We'll talk adding a second power supply, backing up your NAS. Acer says they're going to stop selling crap. We've got a collection of gorgeous PC builds and a hybrid HD roundup. It's all coming up next on Twitch.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twitch.
Bandwidth for Twitch is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, episode 148, recorded December 8th, 2011. Skyrim tweaks and cheap hard drives. This episode of Twitch is brought to you by Ford, featuring available voice-activated Sync. Sync gives you versatile access to music, podcasts, and more from just about any device. Check it out in the new 2012 Ford Focus and at Ford.com/technology. And by Newegg. Check out the Newegg Gadget Trade-In site powered by Gazelle. Trade in your used gadget today at Newegg.com/trade and receive a Newegg gift card. That's Newegg.com/trade. Welcome to Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware. I'm Patrick Norton, not joined as always by Ryan Trout. My beloved co-host Ryan is actually trapped in Chicago's O'Hare Airport, or will be shortly trapped in an airplane, assuming Chicago lets go of his flight on time. I'll be joined by one of my favorite co-hosts in the world, Mr. Robert Heron, who you may know from Techzilla and HD Nation. How you doing, man?
Very good, thank you. Thank you for having me on today, too. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you for making the time. I'm kind of laughing because right now Ryan's got like 10 minutes before his flight takes off, so he's actually in the chat room.
Oh, that's awesome. Perfect pre-flight banter, just to get you ready for the about a 5.5-hour jaunt. Hopefully less, though.
Hopefully less. Hopefully you'll get lucky and have the go-go on the flight. There's nothing cooler than flying with the internet, at least until it slows down, because everybody's finally discovered that there's internet on airplane flights now. We should probably talk a little bit about tech news. If you're not familiar with Twitch, it's Twitch at twit.tv. We cover the big news in computer hardware. We do some viewer questions to wrap up the show. We got some, it's crazy, right? Last week, not a lot of news, not a big news week. Probably should get rid of the, perhaps the most boring story of the week, Intel's antitrust suit by New York. New York was suing Intel basically for spending billions. To do things, how would I describe this? The Seattle PI actually had a pretty good article on this, but essentially a federal judge is dismissing several claims against Intel in an antitrust lawsuit filed by New York's Attorney General. The suit basically said Intel paid billions to computer companies in kickbacks so it could dominate the microprocessor market.
That's the way it works.
Yeah, well.
And it has always worked that way, be it the operating system or the CPU. What do you have to do to grease the wheels to get your parts into those systems? And it shouldn't surprise anyone that this kind of stuff goes on, but the trick is not getting caught. And apparently Intel finally did. So, but
part of what was funny about is the federal judge basically said, New York, you have no right to bring this case under federal law. Go away. So the case, at least for now, is going away. In more cheerful news, while we're all waiting for hard drive prices to drop, later on in the show, we've got some interesting hacks. At least one of our viewers has found as a way to get inexpensive 3TB hard drives, because I'm going to be sprinting at an unreasonably high rate of speed after the show to go take advantage of this over at Costco or other stores. But if you go up a PC perspective, Alan Malventano did a really cool write-up, hybrid storage roundup, Seagate Momentus XT versus OCC Revo Drive hybrid versus the Intel Z68. And years ago, right, we get questions about this occasionally. Where are the hybrid drives? Well, Alan's been benchmarking them right now. Hybrid drives are an interesting concept. Essentially, a traditional rotating media drive has a bunch of memory on it called cache, and in the case of a hybrid drive, it's got a whole bunch more memory on it.
Well, it also uses flash memory as well, so it's not just using traditional RAM like you would have, say, a volatile RAM like you'd have in your computer memory system. This is actually doing a little bit of an SSD combined with the rotating disk technology to try to give you the best of both worlds, the capacity really, with some of the read performance of the flash memory.
Part of what I thought was interesting is these are all 2.5-inch drives, or nominally are 2.5-inch drives, and you know, you know, you can look at boot times, pricing, and the cache versus uncache, where the hybrid drives gets really interesting, where it start caching large amounts of your data. And so, you know, it boots, the first boot takes like 35, 45 seconds. The second boot takes like 10 to 20 seconds, depending on which drive you're choosing. I'm going to make everybody go to pcpro.com/review/storage/hybrid storage roundup, Seagate, Momentous, et cetera, et cetera. The title goes on and on. But it's a pretty interesting look at the performance of these drives. And the fact that I think hybrid drives are definitely a valid option. If you don't have the money for an SSD and you're looking for, or you just don't need to get the capacity you want out of an SSD, going with a hybrid drive is going to give you full zoot performance without, you know, costing you several $100s to get, you know, like $600 to get 750 gigabytes. These will be more expensive than traditional media drives, but they will offer you a profound performance boost over a traditional rotating media drive.
Totally. Just keep in mind, though, that you're not getting the write speed that you'd get with, say, a total flash memory drive like an SSD. So, other than that,
writes.
It's a good deal.
Who saves files?
Just the poor little NAS grinding away constantly.
Oh, man. Are you excited? I know you've been playing Skyrim, because everyone I know has been talking about dragons and Dragonbane and Styx, and you had a good screed on taking the mountaintop hell that you wandered into. And NVIDIA, in fact, has a tweak guide for Skyrim. What's going on with that?
Yeah, they sure do. Credit to NVIDIA's gaming website, the GeForce website, for just putting together a terrific guide. So if you want to go in and really get into some of the settings related to image quality for Skyrim itself on the PC platform, they put together a terrific guide that actually I've been going through myself, borrowing some of their tips, trying things out, see what works for my hardware, see what doesn't. And so far, I got to say, I'm enjoying it. In particular, things like enabling self-shadowing within the game itself. That's probably one of the bigger items there. And also, they have some comparison shots as well with different setting combinations and the performance related to enabling some of these settings. And in this particular article, they're demonstrating it with one of their new 560 Ti cards. And I'm running a 570 card right now, so it's kind of in the back of my mind. I'm thinking, okay, where would my numbers fall within that relative system? But considering how long it can take to, say, like make a change in a game like Skyrim, exit the editor, enter the game, take a look at what it is, maybe do a screen cap. The folks at GeForce just made it really easy for just putting together a bunch of screen caps with all the related settings, and in that case, allowing you basically to say, hey, here's what I'd like to see. Will I be able to get the performance I'm looking for once I make those changes? And if not, how the heck do I back out of it and get back to default settings that work for me? I was trying some of the more advanced settings that related to, I guess, the grid system that the game uses for loading and the data that it draws the world with. And after trying out some of the higher end settings, they were recommending it more for the folks running high-end 580 cards. But I found that was nuking my performance just enough to where I'd rather have the frame rate than the visual quality, so I ended up backing off on a couple of things. But it's awesome. If you're playing the game and you have GeForce hardware, or NVIDIA's hardware, check out that article. It's really well done, and it's constantly being updated as drivers are being updated, as the game's being patched, as is the life of PC gaming in general. So it's pretty cool, though, I have to admit.
Yeah.
And, of course, and Battlefield 3. I was in the same article. They linked to a great tweak guide too for Battlefield 3. So if you're knee deep in that game as well, which currently I don't know of another first-person shooter that has a better visual system ever at this point. So it's just a gorgeous-looking first-person shooter game if you're into that kind of thing. So good stuff on the PC side. Gaming in general right now is just terrible fun and a great time sink for the holidays. So all the goodness right there.
Yay. Sorry, I was just like, I got to stop texting Ryan in the chat room. I'm teasing him about CES.
I signed my first NDA agreement today for some new hardware I'll be seeing at CES, and I'm, needless to say, it's getting me excited, but I'm looking forward to taking a vacation or a break before CES comes. So
You can come help me work on the house in Alameda.
There you go. There you go.
LCD makers to pay $388 million in price-fixing suit. We found this one up on Digital Trends up on news.yahoo.com. Samsung, Sharp, LG, and 5 other flat-screen display manufacturers have agreed to pay a total of $388 million to settle a civil class action suit brought against them by the U.S. Department of Justice over LCD price-fixing. Japan's largest LCD manufacturer, Sharp, says Digital Trends will pay the largest penalty, $105 million. Samsung, 72, CMI, which is a Taiwanese manufacturing company, 78 million, LG, another 75 million. This was actually broken by Bloomberg. For some reason, I missed that because I'm a terrible show host. But essentially, though, there's 7 manufacturers that,
when LCDs were their most expensive. I mean 2001 to 2007. When the panels were at the peak of their pricing, and there's a good reason why it was that way. It was because the main players were all colluding together in terms of pricing. And I'll be honest with you, this settlement is nothing. And this isn't going to change any of their practices. This is less than 1% of their profits for this year. So collectively,
it's funny because you look at it because the Bloomberg article goes on to say that the litigation stemmed from a U.S. DOJ investigation that led to guilty pleas by LG, Chunghwa, and Sharp, who agreed in 2008 and 2009 to pay $585 million in criminal fines. In the class action thing, they all denied wrongdoing. But it was, there
have been several of these cases too, and some executives even have seen prison time. But still, it's like I'm glad nowadays it seems like that is less of a concern. You see now that at least even compared to say 4 years ago, prices really took a dramatic turn down as soon as this was exposed for what it was. Granted, the settlements are happening now, but we've benefited as consumers from this, at least as far as I've seen pricing. I remember right when this came out, and literally the next year, for some models, they were almost half price, and you kind of made you scratch your head. And if you had bought the previous year, like I did, and you saw that wonderful TV you bought drop dramatically during that time, that was a little bit of a gut check too. So terrible when you see things like that, but it does happen. So.
Large companies doing terrible things to make profits.
They want to make money, as we want them to, or their investors want them to, at least.
So Intel broke some big news this year, the idea of 3D transistors with depth, which if I try to explain, I'll be mocked quite rightfully.
All transistors are 3D. This is just, no engineer came up with the term 3D transistor. This is just, it's really just their way of stacking the technology and then creating what they call vias between those levels in order to interconnect the layers of the chip. And they're finally getting good at it. And what this will mean is that they'll be able to create a far denser CPU, and basically more in a smaller space, or more capability in the same size package. And it's going to be all good.
Yeah, Tri-Gate was the name of the technology that Intel announced earlier this year. So what happened this week was Fujitsu and Suvolta, a CMOS design, a custom CMOS design company, came up with the deeply depleted channel, the DDC technology. So the idea is basically reducing power consumption on the chip, and it's also going to be a long time before we see these implemented in the fab. But basically, the quote is, during the IDDM conference in Los Altos earlier today, Fujitsu presented a paper jointly authored by Suvolta, describes how a newly developed transistor with a deeply depleted channel can achieve the same power savings as those announced by Intel, that has launched a FinFET transistor, which the company calls a 3D transistor. So interesting stuff. All I care about is it basically means we're going to get more power in with less power, more computing power with less electrical consumption. So this makes me happy. So
Moore's law being perpetuated yet again in a way of speaking. Well, it's a way of taking that current tech that we have, and I'll be curious to see how far they can expand upon this down the road. I mean, well, I think it'll be more than a 2x improvement initially. Eventually, they'll be. You just think about it, going from just being on a flat plane, being able to do the connections like that, to going into 3 dimensions easily. Well, I don't know how easily, relatively speaking, but it should be exciting.
Well, it's also the way they control the gate on the chip. It's pretty interesting. But it's one of the things that the Suvolta apparently has an advantage in that they can use the Intel technology requires the same voltage across the entire CMOS. the Suvolta implementation basically means they can have different they can basically use different threshold voltages across different transistors, so they can, it's basically a better implementation for a system on a chip, i.e. something you find in an iPad or a notebook or something like that. So
sounds like you might be able to better gate the chip itself and optimize, turn off parts of it too more easily, which Intel's also really good at that as well. So let's just get some chips out there and see what they can do with this stuff.
Sorry, I was supposed to say goodnight to Ryan Strout before he hops on his plane. Before we take a moment to thank our friends over at Ford, heads up from Anantech.com, introducing AMD's Radeon 7000M and NVIDIA's GeForce 600M Mobile. It's kind of funny, you know, the Jared over at Anantech.com says, traditionally, AMD and NVIDIA have launched their new series of graphics products at the high end and worked their way down, you know. Basically, for the 7000 series from the AMD Radeon, they say they're starting at the mobile side first. And where did NVIDIA go? Where did the NVIDIA part of the article go? Because I cannot memorize all of this. There it is. Oh, it's on the next page. After the fold. And then yesterday, NVIDIA basically refreshed their entry-level and mid-range mobile processors with the 600Ms. So there's 3 new 600M parts which are coming out. So if you've been thinking about buying a notebook and graphics performance is critical to you and you're not spending top-of-the-line money, you may want to start looking around for the 7000M and the new 600M parts from AMD and NVIDIA. So I think it's going to be interesting to see if we see any of these parts on the show floor at CES. So
I still think these are great options compared to the integrated chipsets from Intel, at least. I've just been generally disappointed compared to the same feature, or the feature sets you get with, say, an AMD or an NVIDIA mobile chipset for just overall things, like everything from decoding capabilities to support for maybe GPU functionality. Also, my other favorite part really is just some of the basics too, like can you do RGB versus component video output through HDMI? AMD's always had a setting in there to allow you to switch back and forth between those standards, and you're kind of just stuck with RGB with Intel's parts. But that's something that could be addressed in the future. We'll see. But for right now, for my usage needs, I really kind of depend on what AMD and NVIDIA are doing on their chipsets as far as home theater goes.
I should probably point out, as Keith512 in the chat room goes, cough, cough, rebranded cards, which is, it's not so much rebranded cards as rebranded, rebadging the GPUs. The 7000M series is based on the Turk and Caicos GPUs, which are essentially the 6000M series. So it's kind of like they're launching 7000M by putting a new name on 6000M, which is probably have pretty good yields while they wait for the 7000, the real next generation process to kind of the Southern Island process, the Southern Island parts to kind of get up to scale so they can actually make enough of them to make people, well, to fill the channel.
There you go.
This episode of Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, is brought to you by Ford, featuring Sync. If you haven't checked it out, Sync's amazing. It's an entertainment system. It's navigation. But the entertainment stuff I really love. You guys know I love music. You can play music, podcasts. Of course, you got FM radio built in. But if you got an iPod, a mobile phone, tablet, a flash drive, you plug those directly into Sync via USB, you are good to go. You can play your favorite tracks, like all of my lossless audio encoded stuff. And Sync with a MyFord Touch actually lets you play videos or display photos from your digital camera, your portable devices, only, however, if the parking brake is engaged, because it would be unsafe to try to look at pictures of the grandchildren or your girlfriend while you're driving on the highway. It's basically a media hub. The Sync technology brings a whole bunch of stuff together inside your car: music, entertainment, navigation. If you got a wired connection, USB ports, SD slots, you can plug that into the Sync's entertainment hub. It's great. If you want to use Bluetooth audio, like you're listening to Pandora or something like that, you can run the application over Bluetooth to the Sync head units, or just connect your device and play, which is pretty awesome. The thing I like the most: hands are on the wheel. You hit the button on the center of the steering wheel or the side of the steering wheel. Play genre, rock. Play clutch, or play track. Shogun named Marcus, and you're going to be able to listen to your tracks, shift tracks, change albums, all without taking your hands off the wheel. It is super safe. It is super easy. Voice commands are so nice when you want to actually listen to something without making it dangerous for everybody in the lanes around you. If you've got my Ford Touch HD radio, I haven't had a chance to play around with this, but this is cool. It's basically iTunes tagging. You hear a song you like, you can tag the song you like on the radio. That's going to transfer the info to your iPod, and then you can purchase a song from iTunes at a later time, or at least iTunes will tell you if you want to purchase this song, that you can go to Amazon and get the CD and rip it in full quality. Sync's pretty cool. I like it a lot. I've played around with it, the Mustang, the Focus, the Fiesta, but I especially want to tell you to check out the 2012 Ford Focus, which has great gas mileage and is really fun in traffic. And you can learn more about Sync and all the other technologies Fords are bringing to the vehicles at Ford.com/technology. And of course, we want to thank Ford for sponsoring this episode of Twitch. See, it was all because Robert was gone.
What happened?
Don't ask. I forgot how to read and talk at the same time.
Man.
My favorite headline this week, up at All Things D. Oh, this is one of the great headlines of all times. Acer CEO says we're going to stop selling crap.
Please,
please. And it's the kind of headline you really can't resist clicking on. Of course, that assumes you can actually find the headline, which has magically disappeared. There it is. We're going to stop selling cheap, unprofitable crap. Acer CEO J.T. Wang says John Pikowski has settled on a turnaround strategy for the company, one that will return it to profitability after 2 consecutive quarters of net losses. And it's going to pin its hopes on an Ultrabook. I like Ultrabooks. I think it's a good platform. I think it's a good competitor to the, to this, the MacBook Air.
Well,
Quote,
can you really
J.T.
compare?
Wang says, I think you can compare it. Actually, the Asus one is really nice.
Right.
And IBM's got a pretty good one. IBM, Lenovo's got a pretty good one. Quote, we will shift our strategy to improving profitability from pursuing market share blindly with cheap and unprofitable products. Ultrabooks will become our key growth driver next year as customers want a lighter, thinner notebook with longer battery life. Selling more Ultrabooks will also help improve our profit margins as they command higher prices. So, good luck. Good luck to Acer.
That's not the only company I've heard recently. Well, at least tell me personally, they're looking down the road going, you know what, we don't want to be pumping out cheap crap for the rest of this company's life, and we're not exactly sure what's coming next, but we need to do something, because it gets to the point where it becomes a commodity, and at that point, the company's like either anybody could manufacture it at that point, or they have to keep innovating. So I'd rather see them push it more than, sit back and just pump it out like anybody could. So good luck to Acer. And I just want to see Ultrabooks just become a little bit more powerful too. I guess I'm thinking more of the netbook phase that we went through like a year ago or 2 years ago, right. Where, yeah, you can give me a 10-inch screen that weighs a pound, sure, but if it doesn't have enough oomph to run the apps I need to run and to make it look smooth and silky, then I'm not that interested. It needs to be usable.
Wow. Yeah, no, and I don't know. The whole netbook thing was a flare. It disappeared. I think a lot of people who might have bought netbooks in the last year bought iPads or other tablets. For those of us who are sort of in the more mid-range market, there's a good write-up on PCPro.com. The Dell Inspiron 14Z, basically talking about a reasonably priced notebook, right? A $600 notebook, and I was actually impressed looking at what was inside of this Core i5 processor. Where did it go? Where did it go? Where did it go? I keep stuck on the style page.
It's brand new for $500 or $600.
Yeah, $600. And you're looking at this, it's like starts at $599, relatively, they're calling it a thin and powerful. Core i5 2410M, 2.3 gigahertz. It's more of an entry level HD 3000 graphics, of course. 6 gigs of DDR3, a 640 gigabyte hard drive, 8X DVD burner, 14.1 inch 1366 by 768 display, 64-bit Windows, 6-cell lithium-ion battery. I'd prefer 9, but you know me, I always want more battery. Has an Ethernet port, a webcam, and it weighs 4.23 pounds. So they're also saying one of the things that Matt said was they now seem to sort of tweak the configurations around, and the price may be up $750, which is a bit more than $600, but not a bad deal for a relatively light and portable notebook. You know, when you're looking at Ultrabooks costing $1,000 plus, a 4-pound package, even if it's a little thicker, that includes an optical drive, is actually pretty impressive. But there's a good review on that up. Oop.
Oh, go ahead. I was going to say, that looks real similar to the notebook I have spec-wise, and the one thing I did about a year later after owning a notebook like that was to swap out the hard drive for an SSD, and there was no single finest upgrade you can do to a notebook in my humble opinion. It literally makes it feel twice as fast. So if you do buy something like that, think about down the road finally getting around. You're going to lose. You're not going to get 640 gigabytes for an affordable price, but get 120 gigs for zippy SSD performance that isn't going to totally break the bank. Yeah, no, it's also interesting if you take a look at if you're curious about benchmarking sort of the low-end Core i5 versus the mid-range Core i5 versus the Core i7. There's some really good benchmarks up on that article up at PCPer.com. The Dell Inspiron 14C review, 14Z. I wonder why they came up with the Z on that one. I don't know. Man. Well, prepackaged water cooling been going nuts, and PNY is the latest one to enter in on that one. Or I should say PNY and Ace Tech have put together quite the little GTX 580. Totally. If you're into something, say, of the CPU coolers that are prefabbed to incorporate liquid cooling, it's all sealed right from the factory. This is basically what PNY is doing with a GTX 580 NVIDIA graphics card. It includes basically the radiator going to the dual slot card design, and you get the 120 millimeter fan. I believe that's a 120 millimeter fan. I'm just kind of guessing on that one, but yet another one of those options you can do that if you don't feel like running, say, a cooling system that's going to take care of the CPU and the GPU together and other stuff in one long continuous chain. You'd rather just have a single component to swap in. Maybe you're satisfied. Maybe you have a good air cooler and you just want to try some serious overclocking, or hopefully a cooler or quieter cooling solution for a graphics card. That'd be the way to go. I'd be curious to see, though, how far can you push that liquid cooling solution compared to, say, a standard air-cooled 580? That'd be a good comparison I'd like to see on the throwdown between that hardware and others. Is it worth trying to push a card like that much faster than you could, say, over air? Because in my experience, I found that most graphics cards really aren't worth pushing faster than the speeds they have at stock, unless the cooling's just perfect otherwise. Or you got a freaky good card that just clocks really well, but... Right. And also, too, you might not even need to overclock your graphics card. You could have a game like Skyrim that's, generally speaking, CPU limited more than GPU limited. So,
well, it seems like it always seems like GPU overclock, at least to me, and I could be profoundly wrong about this, but it always seems like GPU overclocking just is considerably less rewarding than CPU overclocking in terms of the performance gains on that, or the performance gains, I should say, not performance. The performance of games would be a way to quantify the performance gains. It's way too close to punning, though. Has anybody...
Unless you're running like a supercomputer or something using, say, CUDA cores, or, and if you've got money to be putting together a supercomputer box on that kind of hardware too, you probably aren't too worried about the cooling scenario. So, but I agree with you. I feel like you do get less bang for the buck with overclocking a GPU. Also, they tend to run those GPUs already. Once you get into 3D mode, they will go hot. They'll hit 90 Celsius. Some designs will. Hopefully, it doesn't. I think my current 570 gets up to around 57, 58 before the fan starts really kicking in. But the fan, at least on that design, I have been really happy with the NVIDIA's current 570, 580 dual slot design like that, because even under full load, I never see the fan go above, say, 60%. And yeah, you can barely hear it in my box, but it's not like my previous graphics card where, wow, the fan had to go 100% and it sounded like it to get full when you're going full tilt with it.
It could be a fan, could be some sort of strange room ventilation system. All I know is it was loud.
I had an odd scenario. I was doing some updates on my home theater PC, and I just, for the heck of it, checked the idle speed or the idle temperature in the BIOS, because I had just did a BIOS update and I wanted to just go through the settings to make sure everything was okay. And I'm looking at the idle temperature for the CPU, and it's an i3 35-watt part. It was like 60 plus Celsius, and that's pretty darn warm for idle in the BIOS. So I popped the case open. Everything looked pretty dust-free. I mean, it wasn't too bad. It wasn't like caked up or anything. So I blew it all out. and I reset the CPU. I redid the heatsink compound and put it back on, and I put it back together. I don't think that was the problem, though. I think I actually had a wire that dipped down into the a wire that was going to the motherboard actually dipped down and was touching the fan on the CPU and perhaps was stopping it. And I think that was what really caused was. But it's thank goodness I had that 35-watt part in there, because even without the fan turning, it was cooling to keep going. So anyway, that's just an off-topic thing. Cooling, and check your fans once in a while if you haven't, and dust your PCs too.
Oh my goodness. Hey, if you're looking for inspiration for a PC build, and anybody who's heard my Google Plus thread talking about how much I hate cabling will enjoy this one. HardOCP has a pretty good, check out today's rig of the day picture. I think Chad's got it up there. I'll cut and paste it for the chat room in here. But it is an absolutely gorgeous machine that somebody did a lot of work. You see that whole sort of monochrome white cabling on the interior for that, for the water cooling and the power cables and stuff. It just looks incredible. As I think Kyle maybe pointed out, this guy, Onan, who posted these pictures, said, quote, not a rig of the day candidate by all means, which is an idea of exactly how humble a human being he must be, or she must be, because that is an amazing system. And if you've never checked it out, you should definitely check out the post pics of your rig thread, which is up on hardocp.com also. And it is a collection of some fun. It's basically just, it's constantly growing, and it's a picture of some of the most fantastic machines inside of there. There's a Silverstone case. Somebody did this incredible water cooling plumbing inside of. People who've just built some amazing looking systems, and it makes me really want to go out and build a case from scratch now. And I just love these custom power cables that people are building. They just look absolutely gorgeous. So if you think about building a machine and you want to make it pretty, hardocp.com, the post pictures of your system thread, or I should say the post pics of your rig thread, which has absolutely no comments. That's the
some of those designs you're showing right there, people were individually sleeving the power connectors that go into the graphics card. Each wire was individually sleeved, and I was like, that's some pretty hardcore detail right there. And that white one you initially showed too, I'm willing to bet that right there. I bet you that's a clear tube with white colored coolant in it. And I think that just looks kind of cool. I've always wanted to see one of those just come apart, but they never do. Water cooling's pretty straight up.
Come apart like exploding because they put too much pressure on the piping?
Just something. I just like to see that YouTube video of just one self-destructing and just... Yeah, there you go. Is that not individual for each of the power connectors to the graphics cards, individually wrapped right there?
That's what I would think, unless somebody's
crazy
making
detail
cables you could purchase. But
it looks awesome. I like the way it is.
Well, it's like looking at the detailing inside of a race car. It's just really, really pretty, and it makes me happy.
And it improves airflow, and it's easier to keep it clean on the inside. You know what? For my next PC, my current case, I love it. What the heck is it even? I think it's a Silverstone. I think it's a really good one too. The FBO one, I think it was, but it's just got the worst filter design in terms of removable filters for cleaning out the intake filters, and it's just that's the one thing I just totally dislike about it. So I guarantee you my next case, it will have some easily removed filters that just keep the whole thing nice and dust free.
It's funny you should say that, because you can't really see it from this particular angle on the camera I'm holding up. Maybe if I pull it back a little farther.
There's a little dust there.
But yeah, you can see all that. That's actually the nice thing about these filters that are inside this case.
It looks like you did that with a vacuum cleaner from the outside.
Well, it's so funny. Like it's just, I'm gonna have to pull all the filters off of this just to clean the scum out of. Well, it's not scum, it's dust. But
the FTO one, as Keith 512 mentioned, and yes, my case is off the floor too. By the way, it's also, I got to say, the air intake for the power supply, it's not removable. So once dust gets in there. Anyway, I love the case. I just don't like the filter design, especially that giant fan on the top. You have to actually turn the case upside down, remove the fan to get the filter out. How often are you going to do that?
At least you have a filter.
Yeah, that's
my
true.
Giant fan has no filter.
I was tempted to turn it upside down so it'd be a big exhaust fan on the top, and then I wouldn't have to worry about cleaning that out, and I'd have to redo some of the other air, but airflow through the case. But I don't want to. I'm not going to worry about it.
A real nightmare is cleaning my freaking co-gauge CPU basically the giant cooler, you can't really see it. The glass is preventing it from really showing up, but the co-gauge cooler on this one is just, well, all you can see is a reflection of my monitor, but there's just an incredible amount of dust that's built up on the fins of the cooler, so it'll be fun to wipe that off and hopefully not stuff it in deeper. Are you thinking about upgrading your iPhone, your Android phone, your tablet, your PC parts? You should be thinking about Newegg.com. This episode of This Week in Computer Hardware is brought to you by Newegg.com, the place on the internet to shop for tech and the source of a lot of parts I've bought over the last 5 years. You can actually now trade in your used gadgets and get a Newegg gift card at the Newegg trade-in site, which is powered by Gazelle. If you haven't seen Gazelle, Gazelle.com is a place to cash in and recycle old electronics. And if you haven't heard of Newegg, you should check it out. They are a huge online retailer. And they pride themselves. They want an easy shopping experience, rapid delivery, customer service. If you're thinking about buying a new part or a new motherboard, a really good place to check out is Newegg.com because of the community at Newegg.com is pretty open, pretty upfront, pretty honest about their reviews. One of the ways I found out a problem with a very expensive system I owned was looking up the motherboard on. I was kind of curious because the motherboard died. I looked up that particular motherboard on Newegg.com, and lo and behold, there was like a 50% failure rate for people that purchase that motherboard. So if you're thinking about buying something expensive, you can get an idea about how well it might perform by looking at the rather well-informed reviews up on Newegg.com. They have a huge selection of PC parts and consumer electronics, over 84,000 products, an award-winning website. And they really are trying to equip the customers at Newegg with information to help make smart decisions, detailed specs, how-tos, literally something closing in on 2 million customer reviews, and nicely detailed photo galleries. Thinking about buying something for your computer, for your friends, for the holiday, check out Newegg.com and take advantage of the trade-in site at Newegg.com, which is powered by Gazelle. And we want to thank them for sponsoring this episode of This Week in Computer Hardware. Anybody up for a tech question or two?
You know it, man.
James,
let's do this.
This. I'm going to read this one. You can answer it. James, I left the device we need to explain about this sitting at my desk. James has a question about power consumption. It says, gentlemen, with all the tools floating around to help us overclock our systems, I have not seen one that can determine the power being consumed by the CPU. For example, I have an Asus 990FX Sabertooth, an 1100T CPU rated at 125 watts at the default setting, 16 gigs RAM, and NVIDIA 5600 Ti. If I disable one of the cores or vary the clocking, how do I determine the power being used? I'm asking because I've determined that by disabling cores, I can upgrade the clocking of the active cores. I can overclock it higher. And since very few applications can take advantage of 6 cores, going to 5 cores does not seem to make any difference. Thanks, James L. And all I could think of was like, if you there's no real way that you could look at the voltage, but you need kind of voltage and amperage to figure out the wattage you're sucking down.
Well, right. You could use a basic wall power meter, something like.
That's what I was thinking.
What's the most popular one? I can't think of right off the top of my head. I actually own one.
The kilowatt.
Yeah, kilowatt. Plug that in, see what it is at default. Perhaps run a program like Prime 95, and you'd have to be real specific and consistent, though, about what stress test you run on a CPU so it's the same every time. If you use Prime 95, you'd have to just configure it the same way every time to ensure that you're doing the same test on the CPU, and then run it under full load at 100%, see what the power consumption is. Disable one of the cores, run it at full load again at 100% with the same test, see what the power consumption is there, and see if you really get any benefit out of it. My new uninterrupted power supply actually incorporates a power meter. It's not great, and I can't really take readings off of it over time to average it, but I can get a good rough estimate just by looking at it. And if you want to take that a step further, the power meters you can get pretty affordably online, either from X-Tech or even a basic one can provide logging functions, which can give you a little more accuracy over time as well. But that'd be one way to do it. I'm a big fan of undervolting a CPU. Whenever I do an overclock on a computer, I then will, or the other opposite would be try to underclock it and see what the minimum voltage is you need to actually keep it running. But when I do an overclock, like on my current i7, sure, if you do it by auto, it's going to ramp it up to, say, just for example, 2.5 volt or 1.5 volts. a lot of voltage for the particular CPU I'm using. And if I do it by hand and manually tweak it, I can get it down to say 1.15, which is it doesn't sound like a lot, but it actually knocks a lot of the temperature off of that's being wasted by the chip itself into the heatsink. So it's something to keep in mind.
Interesting thought coming from, I got to say, James, I'll be shocked if you can actually measure the difference. I was thinking the kilowatt, but I will be pleasantly surprised you can actually measure the power difference shutting off one of the cores at the power supply level.
I'd be curious if any of the
Go ahead.
applications out there that measure temperature or voltage on the chip itself for the cores, check with your chip manufacturer. They might actually have the program that let you monitor specific voltages for the different cores as well, if that information would help. I'm not sure, but something to try.
Anthony, the electrician, wants to make his own DIY dual power supply. And let me explain. He says, "What's up, Twitch crew? Longtime listener with a question about running 2 power supplies. I'm interested in running 2 GTX 580s and SLI. I'm currently running 1 caliber GTX X 580 on a 650 watt PC power and cooling silencer Mark II that I paid $70 for at Micro Center. I want to add a second 580 for a future NVIDIA surround setup, but I don't feel like paying hundreds of dollars for an AN 1000 watt 80 plus certified power supply. As an electrician, I figured I can neatly splice together another 650 watt silencer MK2 at the 120 volt feed to run the second card and a few hard drives. I want to know if the second power supply has to interact with the motherboard in any way. Is there some kind of voltage regulation that takes place between the motherboard, power supply, and the video card? The way I see it, the second card would only need to draw basic power, but before I fry my investment, I want to ask the pros first."
Well, I don't know the answer to that. I'm going to say right off the top of my head. I have seen where you use separate power supplies to drive separate hardware within the system. Right. But if you're not controlling that power supply with the motherboard, you need to set it up so that you probably have to manually turn it on and off unless you were wiring that up as well. I've never hacked into power supplies.
Well, basically, usually you can turn a power supply on by jumping a couple of you can basically power a power supply by jumping a couple of the connectors on that big ATX connector that goes to your motherboard. You know, the hardware hacker in me is like, yeah, splice another one on there. But you know, you also may want to be aware that, look, if memory serves, right, you're looking at just under 300 watts at full power for a GTX 580. So 300 divided by 120 is going to give you something over 2 amps of electricity you're pushing out there. If I'm doing the math correctly, at least on the back end.
You're definitely going to need a second power supply. You're going to need more power to drive 2 graphics cards.
And what
one of those cards could take out could easily consume 500 to 600 watts with all the other hardware running at full tilt with the CPU under full load. I mean, that's getting close to what my 570 does in my current system. Under 100% CPU, 100% GPU, it'll consume about 550 to 600 watts. So, and I have an 800 watt power supply, so I'm getting close to the limit on mine. I wouldn't even try to put another second card in my box at this point. Although,
244 watts is what NVIDIA is saying is the maximum, the cap on the graphics card power. So yeah, definitely say 2 of those is going to put the 600 watt power supply underwater, I would imagine, or at least stress the hell out of it. You know, you're an electrician, Anthony. You know, as far as I know, there's no, other than the jump on the ATX connector that actually turns the power supply on when you hit the switch on the front of the case, there's no real interaction that I know of. The power supply itself should be fairly self-regulated. You know, the 5 volt, 12 volts, you can figure out the wiring on that. I am uncomfortable with doing this. I would not do it myself. However, you are an adult, and hopefully your home is insured. I don't think you're going to, I mean, it takes a lot of work to blow up a power supply, and I'm going to knock on wood now that I've said that, because once I've said that, of course, I'll blow my house up tonight, which would really suck since I'm now a homeowner. But it would suck.
I will say the good folks over at Hard SCP do great power supply reviews too. If you're ever interested in shopping for a new power supply, and I pretty much don't buy anything until at least they run it through one of their battery of tests, because they are brutal on their power supply tests, and if there's any flaw whatsoever, they'll find it. So.
You don't need, though, you don't need a 1,000-watt power supply. I think, 750, 800 watts is going to take care of you, unless you're talking about a whole lot of hard drives along with those two GTX 580s. And I was kind of surprised. I've never seen anybody, I was searching around and I just hadn't seen anybody adding a second power supply this way. Probably because they're not electricians and they don't think of this. Well, actually, I take that back. I did find some stuff back in 2003. Back when, power supply was ridiculously constrained. Oh, wait. Hey, check this out.
It looks like there are some external power supplies. Yeah, I just did a search for that. Now suddenly it's popping up a few things. So, you know what? There might be some hardware out there, actually.
Actually, do they still make these? No. That would be Ultra Power Partner. Let's see if it's still made. Ultra Power Partner. That's an interesting idea. Huh. It's like a supplementary 325-watt power supply. Came out 2007. That's really crazy. I actually found an Overclockers Club review on that one.
Is it still around is the question.
Well, it is actually showing up. Ultra Components and Technologies, 325 watts, $50 from ultraproducts.com. If they're still selling it, well, why don't we see if it's up on newegg.com?
Well, there you go. That's the one.
Well, I'm seeing, wow. Hey, they actually sell door locks and hall-in closet, ultra hardware. So I'm getting ultra hardware,
looking for a door lock now.
Door locks, door hardware. Okay, apparently there's a possibility that Ultra Components, ultraproducts.com may have it. If you can find it at a power partner, they're actually listing it at $50. For the Ultra power supply. That's an interesting idea. You basically stuff a second power supply in a 5.25-inch drive slot, if you can actually find one. Interesting concept. Power partner, 325-watt power supply. So, yeah, if you don't feel like experimenting with wiring in a second drive, you could support your you could support your video habit, your second GTX 580 with a additional power supply. That's trippy. I have never seen one of these before.
Excellent. Wow. And I gotta say, the forums are blowing up with a couple of suggestions too for the black arts of getting dual power supply units in your system as well. And also, if you need to jump a power supply, Eggy the Tech just posted a good link at Directron. They had a link on how to get that done too. So, yes, there might be ways of doing this.
Actually, there's a Hard OCP article. I'm going to thank Eggy the Tech. No, is Eggy the Tech post? No, Proteus.
Yep.
Has a Hard OCP article. That's really cool. The black
yes, there's hope for this.
Enthusiast PC. Yep, there's the look at that. I'm looking at the big picture at the top, and that is the jumping of the ATX cable. Wow, Hard OCP just seems to be reading our minds today. Interesting. Add to PSU, Lianli secondary power supply, starter kit, auxiliary power supply, redundant power supply. This is really interesting. Anthony, the electrician, there's a whole market of products directed exactly at you. And Lianli is actually pretty reputable. Get power on signal from the main power supply unit to start up the secondary power supply unit. Beyond that is all Lianli has to say. Interesting article. Black Arts, dual PSUs in your enthusiast PC. Lucas wants to back up a NAS. This is something we've suffered with. He says in the various Twitch shows, remote backup over Carbonite is advertised and recommended. While generally I agree, this will only work if it involves, at least for the advertised Carbonite service, one person and you have enough upload bandwidth. I have a large NAS with about 2.5 terabytes used and 5.5 terabytes available, and only an upstream bandwidth of about 100 kilobytes per second. Ow. 1 megabit per second is upload speed is advertised. Overhead is about 20%, he said, which would take me more than 10 months to upload all my data once. Do you have any suggestions for me on how to properly back up my NAS, which is already a 4-disk system in RAID 5, especially now since hard drive prices have skyrocketed? I know it's hard to solve the problem on a budget. This is privately funded and maintained. No business is involved. So basically, I ask, what would you do under the circumstances to back up your NAS?
Dun, 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 dun. You could either get a second NAS, just like the one you have. I mean, that's probably the most expensive solution, but to have a totally redundant backup. Like I bought 2 of the same NAS devices, and they're both pretty much configured identically, and I can actually mirror them to each other. And that makes it pretty easy, especially if you're dealing with the same hardware. If you're building your own, I would have more experience than I would with this, but I would imagine the software provides options for doing that same thing too. So just, but if you want to mirror it outside of your home, that's where it gets tricky. So
yeah, I mean the crash.
Mike, what? I'm trying to think of the software that
Crash Plan.
Crash Plan has the free backup to a friend.
Yeah, you can do free backup to a friend, which you do on a local network. Crash Plan also lets you seed. They'll send you a 1 terabyte drive that you can seed the upload. If you're only getting 100 kilobytes per second up, first of all, I'd call your ISP and see whether or not that's a glitch, whether it's a wiring issue on DSL or some sort of weird side effect running on your cable modem, because you should be able to get a higher upload speed than that. So what I'm saying is, it shouldn't take you 10 months to back up. It might take you 6 or 8 weeks typically to back up several terabytes of data, but 10 months is a little excessive for 2.5 terabytes. Maybe it's just because it's been a while since I've had to upload that much data. But given that you've only got your NAS isn't that big. It's at most you fill it up, which is going to take you a while. 2.5 terabytes you can fit on a single 3 terabyte drive, and I bring that up because Jim actually had a really interesting thing he noticed. He says he wanted more storage in his Drobo FS, but drives are expensive except at Costco, my beloved Costco. He picked up 5 Western Digital 3 terabyte external drives for $109 each. Inside each was a standard Western Digital green 3 terabyte drive, perfect for the Drobo. My old 2 terabyte drives went into another Drobo FS that Newegg was selling for $400. Jim says you can't have too many backups. My OCC Revo X2 just croaked, and I've got everything on my Drobos backed up with 2 different pieces of software. Just sitting here smiling and waiting for an RMA from OCZ. So cool. I would find a source of external hard drives that are easily priced, Lucas, and I would put your 2.5 terabytes of data on a couple of 2 terabytes or a single 3 terabyte drive. And it's not perfect, but store it at somebody else's house, store it at grandma's house, store it at a friend's house, store it at your locker at work, somewhere that's not going to maybe not your locker at work, depending on where work is, but someplace that if something happens to your house, it's not likely to happen to that other location. But I've got like a 12 terabyte drive, and when I'm done, I'm gonna have like 10 terabytes of it full. So I'll let you know when I figure out how to back that up, other than buying 10 terabytes worth of drives and taking them over to Robert's house. So there you go. And, also, thanks to Jim for the heads up on the cheap drives from Costco, which is where I will be heading shortly after the cast. Finally, you want to do our last question of the show from Matt Bat?
Well, let's see here. Why are external drives cheaper? Matt wants to know. My mom is buying a hard drive for my dad for Christmas. I told her it was a bad time to buy, but she wants to do it. I tooled around on Newegg and noticed that the external drives are significantly cheaper than the internal hard drives. Any idea why? Love the show. Signed, Matt Bat. Well, I would say it has to do with the flooding in Malaysia that triggered the whole price spike that took my beloved 2 terabyte $85 drive up to a current price of north of $200. I give up at this point trying to buy a drive, a hard disk drive. I'm just not willing to pay that much. If you absolutely need it, you're going to buy it. But however, this might be a good time to buy an SSD if you've been thinking about it for an upgrade. But if you need capacity at this point, there's really nothing that beats a magnetic drive. It's hard. It's hard to get around that.
One of the things I was wondering,
why the external drives would be cheaper, though. I just don't think the pricing caught up with them.
Well, I think they order. I think what happens is they order. I think they order the external drives in bulk and they order them earlier. That was my theory. Is they they have to assemble the drive somewhere. And they have to buy a whole lot of them. I don't think it's as sort of immediate kind of difference. I also thought it was interesting. If you go to the Costco.com website, you're only allowed to order 2 of the drives because, and they quote, the severe flooding in Thailand has resulted in a significant supply reduction of hard drives. Due to the limited supply of hard drives, there's a purchase limit of 2 per member. And then they basically tell you this item may be currently in stock at your local Costco warehouse for immediate purchase at a cash and carry price. But it's $150 on the Costco website. So, I think basically they order container loads of external drives on a longer lead, and maybe a lot more of those got created early on. But I think between now and Christmas, drives,
they end up using the first of the drives that come off for a run of a new drive too. Yeah. Usually when a new hard drive design is introduced, it comes first in an external case. And I wonder too if I would assume that maybe if there's a performance issue with some of the early runs of a new series, you wouldn't notice it as much in an external unit compared to, say, if you're buying a stack of 5 drives and you have one suddenly acting weird or something like that. That could be a scenario like that. But I personally can't wait. I need another 2 terabyte hard drive, or I might just go for the 3. But one thing I think.
Oh, go ahead.
We were talking about backing up large amounts of data, though. One thing about CrashPlan that I don't know, and I want to test this out, is say you have 5 terabytes of data that are on your NAS, and you want to back that up remotely to your friend. Could you already copy that data over, and then could it just check the other end? You manually then move the system over to your friend's house. You plug them in. You have the software look at each other, and then they could just do a comparison to see, like, oh, you already have most of the files backed up. Maybe we only need to then do a transfer the difference, or so to speak. So that's one of those configuration setup questions that I don't know the answer to off the top of my head, and I want to find out. Because that would help you get around. Then you wouldn't need to do the transfer of the whole 5+ terabytes of data. You could only then do whatever you need to do incrementally.
Well, incremental. Basically, once you transfer the bulk of the information, most of the services should do incremental backup to changes on that one.
Right, but just so you can save yourself some time and maybe not blow your ISP cap out of the water trying to do that first month of backup or whatever.
Well, I was thinking we should just basically put 2 computers in a room with gigabit. If we can't do a direct transfer between the 2 systems, then move the data over manually, then probably put them on a gigabit network in the same room and let them copy for a week instead of 10 months.
Totally. I moved 4.5 gigs a day or terabytes of data the other day, and it can be a pain when one little file refuses to move for something and you don't know why exactly, and it's been running for, I think it took 2 days of messing around, I'll say, to finally get it all moved over. But it can be a pain in the butt. It's not always just a straight transfer sometimes too. So
the pain,
don't be in a hurry.
Suffering, the agony. Ladies and gentlemen, hardware is about suffering, and suffering is what we do here on This Week in Computer Hardware, so you don't have to. Ryan Shroud, of course, will be back next week. He is on his way to someplace that is not his home to learn about hardware that he's going to tell you about next week, and he apologizes for not being able to join you. But you got the wonderful, ever so awesome Robert Heron in his place. Robert Heron, what's coming up on TechZilla next week? I understand that's a show you host with a guy named Patrick Norton.
I have something. Finally, we've got a bunch of these remote controls in that will work with your smartphone. Basically, you have an app on your smartphone and a little puck that links to that smartphone application, and then you can use it as a universal remote system. And one even offers more functionality in terms of almost basically transforming your viewing experience into a more TiVo-like thing where you get suggestions and you thumbs up, thumbs down it. What else? Oh, yeah, I have one of those 3D PlayStation displays that just came in that gives you the dual view. I believe that's what they're calling it. It's probably not the right term, but essentially it's another way, and I expect to see this on more TVs coming up in the future, hopefully at CES in January. But instead of doing 3D, how about just 2 completely separate 2D pictures so that you and your friend both put a pair of glasses on, you each see a completely separate picture, and then games that support that give you, instead of doing split screen, you each have a full screen. And you could see going forward, you could, depending on the speed of the imaging system, you could even ramp that up to, say, 4 players instead of just 2. So stuff like that. And, of course, all the other end-of-the-year fun we're having. And as we get ready for CES, I'm just...
Well, sometime in
I'm trying not to get too worked up on CES yet. I'm trying to get ready for Christmas more than anything. Get the holidays past. But
I got to finish getting Christmas together before, because like I'm going to spend the last week before the New Year's basically working on the house. A couple more things coming up on Techzilla next week. We're going to talk about keeping your tech toys from falling apart using one of my favorite substances in the world other than duct tape, which would be Loctite. Loctite Blue is the stuff you see on the screws inside your components. And I got AutoTap Express DIY, the OBD2 scanner, help you basically diagnose engine problems in your car using your computer and turning off the check engine light. And of course, Robert's going to be joining me on HD Nation and Techzilla next week. And PCPer.com. And if you're thinking about building a new PC between now and Christmas, PCPer.com/leaderboard is PCPer.com's guide to the best deals in inexpensive, mid-priced, and oh my goodness, you have a lot of cash to spend on a new system, and I highly recommend you check it out. We got a scoot. That's it for this week in computer hardware. I'm Patrick Norton.
Hey, and I am Robert Heron. Thank you.
And at least one of us will see you next week on Twitch. Thanks for listening.